Hey, welcome to the Church Explained podcast. We appreciate you joining us. The Church Explained podcast is a conversation to develop your leadership and grow your church. Our goal in this podcast is to share inspirational insights and ideas, resource leaders, churches and teams through conversations with key team players at Icon Church and other invited guests. In this episode, we're going to explore the most effective ways to connect new people into the life of church. I'm Dave.
And I'm Nathan.
We're the hosts of this podcast.
We are. And today we're joined on this podcast by Steve Mawston. And we're talking about the most effective ways to connect people into church, new people into church. A little bit of information about Steve. If you listen to our last podcast, you'll know this, but I picked this up from his website. Steve is one of the pastors at Soul Church, a multi-site church based in Norwich in the UK, led by the great, because he might be listening again, John and Chantel Norman. And you and your wife Rachel spent 14, as you put on your website, life-defining years as part of the team in Hillsong, Australia. Yeah. And what's really interesting is actually you were new people's pastors at the Hills campus, is that correct?
Yep.
For part of that time, and then 2008 you've returned with a passion to see the church grow in the UK and
2018.
Europe. 2018, not 2008.
That's it.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, great.
So you're the right person to talk to, really, aren't you? If you were doing that for so many years on helping new people get into church.
Yeah, I didn't do it for the whole time. We probably did it for 18 months. I had 11 roles. Different roles in our time there. So there's two ways of looking at that. Either we were absolutely rubbish and they couldn't find a place for us to fit, or we were really good.
And they gave you everything.
You can decide at the end of the podcast.
It's whether you done all those 11 roles at the same time.
I definitely didn't.
No.
Go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah. So what are some of the important things or the focuses that we should have when it comes to new people coming into church, coming into the life of church?
Look, there's three words I always think are really important when it comes to new people, and it's these three words: celebration, assimilation, and activation.
Right.
They're good words, those.
So the first one, if I just kick off with the first one, I think it's really important that we celebrate new people, we acknowledge them. I don't know whether you've ever been on holidays to a church and you go in and nobody speaks to you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now the service might be exceptional, the preacher might be phenomenal, but you'll never go back if nobody acknowledges you, or even better, celebrates you. I remember hearing an Oprah Winfrey interview, and they asked her about, of all of the shows that you've done, Oprah, what was the one life-defining lesson? And she, very surprisingly, she talked about a psychologist that had done some research on parenting. And they said that when a child walked into a room, they were looking to see that they were acknowledged and celebrated by their parent. Mm. And if the parent would look at them and, how are you, and smile, they grew up with a healthy sense of identity. If they just ignored them, they grew up with insecurities. So I thought, wow, what an amazing thought that that's of all of the great world leaders that Oprah has interviewed, that's the one thing she took away. And it made me realize every person is looking to be celebrated.
Yeah.
Every person that's new to your church is subconsciously asking this question: did you actually notice me? Did you see that I was here? Or do you just treat me as a number in your system?
So what are some of the ways that churches can celebrate a new person?
Some of the practical ways is making sure they get a great welcome as they walk in. I know you guys have been really intentional on this. People at the door, people in the foyer, people as they walk into the auditorium. We used to have spotters who adopt a row in Hillsong, welcoming them into their seats. So I think that's really important. Then when the service starts, acknowledging new people. When the MC moment comes, acknowledging them again. When the preacher starts, acknowledge them. If someone makes a decision. So we would aim to acknowledge new people 3 or 4 times just in the service. Wow. We'd give them a red bag with gifts. Different people have different ways of doing it, but the delivery mechanism is up to you. The principle is celebrate new people, acknowledge them.
So I like that idea, celebrating new people. We'll get on to the other words in a moment. So just trying to think of that, because that sounds like a system, really, doesn't it? Do you think churches need to have some sort of system? Doesn't matter what size they are, but do you think they need a system?
Look, I think before the system comes the culture.
I like that.
And the value.
Yeah.
Because you can have all the systems in the world, but if your heart doesn't beat for new people, if you're not passionate about new people. It doesn't matter what system you've got. People will sniff it. Right? I go running with John Norman, and every now and then a dog will appear, and I hate dogs because I went door to door knocking when I was 13 for Jesus, and a little dog came out and bit my ankle. So since then I've never liked dogs. So now whenever I go running, if there's a dog, they'll run past John and start barking at me. They
smell the fear, don't
sniff
they?
it. Yeah, exactly.
it
They
out.
can tell, and I reckon new people can tell whether we actually really value them and are interested. It's not about the system.
So you could have all that system, as you say, but actually if there's no heart in that system,
Heart
it's missing the point.
and value. One thing I love about John Nolan, I mean, he's called it Soul Church for a reason. He is passionate about souls.
Yeah.
And I've said this a number of times. I feel really challenged by him. He's a chaplain in the club, Norwich City Football Club, and he's literally had half of the playing staff, most of the management team on the front row stood with him. So when you stand up and you preach and you see someone who's playing in the Premier League, you become much more aware of new people.
Are we talking about Norwich?
Yes.
Norwich aren't in the Premier League.
Well, they were last year, and they're going back this year.
Just
Yes,
correct
they
it
are.
quickly,
Yes, they are.
wipe that out.
But do you know what I mean? It's the principle. And when was the last time you as a church leader brought someone new to church? Because you see it through different eyes. You see it as being more than a system. You notice when somebody acknowledges them and spends a bit of time and has the conversation. So I think the cultural value comes first, then the system has got to back it up.
Wonderful. So the second word was assimilation.
Assimilation. So that's probably more where you've got the system, and that can be, it can be a million different ways of doing it. At the moment, we're experimenting with something in Soul Church. I resisted this. We talked about doing this in Brisbane about 4 years ago, and that's QR codes.
Okay, yeah.
I had all the cutting edge.
Yeah.
We've got to get QR codes to assimilate people into groups and teams. And I resisted it. And the reason I resisted it is this. I think when it comes to church life, you've got to be two words, high touch and high tech. Touch means the soft skills, tech means the hard skills. I don't like the word touch. It sounds a bit weird, but if you go with me, we've got to be high tech and high touch. And I thought the QR code was a bit too high tech. Whereas now, because of COVID, everyone is used to whipping out their phones and scanning a QR code.
Yeah.
So at the moment, we're going to stick these QR codes on the back of the chairs because we've been using them to check in to church. And now everyone's familiar. So now, just to make it easy for people that want to get acknowledged but don't necessarily want to go to a welcome lounge, we're going to stick QR codes on the back of your chair. Hey, if you're new, why don't you just scan your code?
Yeah.
That way we know that you're part of our church. So high tech, high touch.
And I think that it comes into a relevancy as well, because I think we'd have to teach a lot of our church how to use a QR code, whereas now we don't have to do that. And it's part of their life.
Exactly.
Part of their life, so they're so used to it that actually it's something that we're able to use as well.
Yeah, exactly right, Nathan.
It's interesting you talking about, obviously, that celebration.
Yeah.
And we on our welcome cards, we used to have like a little part that used to say, like, it was kind of like a feedback little bit.
Yeah.
And all the time as a church, we'd get such a friendly church, which was great. But then we'd be like, yeah, but we don't just want to be a friendly church. We want to be a church of friends.
Very
and
good.
I guess that talks into the assimilation and building that. And again, does that come into a culture thing rather than just a system?
I really do think you've hit on it there. It's that value of when you come to church, do you just talk to your friends or do you ever talk to anyone that's new? So we call it a PSG, a pre-service gathering, where we gather all the volunteers. And John will often come in and say, guys, we all know each other. When you spill out into the foyer, it's now about talking to someone that's new, someone that looks different to you, someone that smells different to you. Let's make sure our mission is to love on people, care for them, connect to them. So I absolutely agree. It's a cultural value.
Yeah, so you got to be intentional about that sort of stuff,
100%.
don't you? Because if people are so used to being in a group, there's got to be something where we're encouraging them to get out of that group and just having that conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
So let's try and draw this out a little bit, because we've touched it a little bit about this idea of have things changed within church in the sense of welcoming new people. I think they have, But one, because we're online a lot of the time at the minute, and even when we get out of lockdown, depending when this airs, but when we get out of lockdown, the question is do the old ways work? Clearly some of them may not work, and hence QR codes. What's your thinking on that? Does it work? Some of the stuff we've done before, the welcoming people, being there for them, or is there something more that we need to do?
Yeah, it's good. It's interesting you mentioned this. Does it work? Is it effective? When we're in Hillsong, obviously it's a huge church.
Yeah.
And we had an amazing team and amazing resources. And so when we were part, as well as being the new people's pastor, one of my jobs was Connect Group pastor, then the volunteer pastor. So I was in this whole assimilation world for a number of years.
Yeah.
So one of the things we employed a guy who was a data miner. And so what he did was everyone's details that we'd entered into My Hillsong, which was our follow-up system, he would track them over several years and produce statistical reports on how effective we were being, which was really fascinating. So we found out, for example, that if someone joined the church, and this is true of any church, not just Hillsong, and if you do nothing, there's something like a 4% chance they'll still be there next year.
Wow.
So it's actually a very small number if you do nothing. However, we found that if we made a call in week 1, it would double to about 8%.
So just explain
Just
that
a
a little
single call. So they're in church.
Yeah.
Someone acknowledges them, gets their details on a card.
Okay.
Card gets entered, and
Like
a
phone
leader
call, email,
calls
something.
them.
Yep.
So statistically, we could prove that there's an 8% chance that they'd be there. Now, here's the interesting one. If you got them in a group within the first 6 months, you've got them into relationship. The statistical chance that they'd be there, guess what it would be? Come on, have a guess, boys. What do you reckon?
35.
What do you think?
60.
It was actually 56%. Wow. Statistically. If you got them serving on a team,
Wow.
so it's not just assimilation, it's activation, it was 64%.
Wow.
So you think about that. There's an 8-fold multiplier. They're 8 times more likely if you can get them in relationship. And that's why our whole focus was to get them into either a group or into a team. Now, the one factor that was really interesting was there was a negative. So if there's a 4% chance they'll be there, there's one factor which was 3%, and that was this. If you connected with them and they were expecting you to call them and you didn't,
Okay.
if you're a group leader or a team leader, it went down to 3%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because in their head, they thought, well, they don't care about me.
Yeah.
So it's got nothing to do with the system.
No.
Yeah.
Everything to do with when the kid walks in the room, does somebody see them?
Yeah.
So again, it's about genuine, authentic friendliness, love, compassion. You can have all the systems in the world, but it's the personal touch that makes a difference.
I think that's great, that personal touch, because even when we were a smaller church, and you might not have loads of staff or even volunteers to be able to do that, one of the things we used to do is we'd send a letter, and that'd come from our pastors, Paul and Jeannie, and there's families who came to the area, were looking for church, and they've said, we came back because we got a letter.
Absolutely.
We came back to
somebody
church
noticed me
because we got a letter.
Somebody celebrated me.
And it's going that extra step, isn't it, as well? Just a bit of a side note, but we ordered some tea. I'm a bit of a coffee drinker, but we ordered some tea from Fortin and Mason in London. And when they sent out the tea, actually it came with a little card. It was gold stamped.
Come on.
To say, hey, we appreciate you for buying our tea. And I thought, that could probably work in church to have a gold stamp.
Absolutely.
Just, going that extra mile, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Where we're really passionate about people, but not just because they're a number, but actually because they're important.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. Because I guess in some settings, people can just see them as, and this is the danger, that they see them as an asset or as a number.
Yeah.
There's danger in that as well, though, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think if the church becomes too corporate, especially big churches, I think Brits have this thing about big churches, they're a little bit suspicious. So you've got to make sure you get that message across. We're actually a small church with a lot of people. So I had a similar story recently to your Fortnum. I'm not as posh as you, so I don't go to Fortnum, but I get a Gusto box. All right, have you ever had a Gusto box?
No.
Because we'd had these during lockdown. We'd been with them for 6 months, and I was opening the box, and there was this massive bar of chocolate. I'm thinking, well, I didn't order that. I know exactly what I order on my app. And then there's a little card saying, because you've been a faithful customer, we just want to send you this. And again, Gusto went from being a system to someone who was actually interested in me. And that's the challenge for us as church is, can we genuinely communicate our heart to people that we're interested in them?
Wow. No, that's really good. So we've had celebration, assimilation, and I forgot your third one. Activation. Look, Dave remembered.
He's a good fellow, isn't he?
He's got a good memory.
Well, assimilation just reminds me of Star Trek and the Borg. We will assimilate you, you know.
The nerd is coming out. The nerd is coming out.
But the last one, go ahead, and let's finish on that one, because that's a great one as well, isn't it?
So activation is, if we see each person that walks through the door as a gift from God, Ephesians 2:10, you're his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works. So I genuinely try, when I talk to a person, is I ask a few questions really quick to think about the gifts and the abilities and the talents that have just walked in with them. They're a whole person, and I'm like, how could they help us? How could they be part of the mission? And I've met people, I say, you are a phenomenal communicator. Have you ever thought about speaking? No. And they're like blown away that you think like that. So I think the more we can get people engaged in the things that they're passionate about.
I think that's crucial, that really, isn't it?
Oh, it's not just making everyone a host, which can be our default, but finding out, what do you actually love? What would you love to do? And so I love the fact that we have the opportunity to see people as the gifts that God has entrusted to us, and how can we, I know this is big for you guys, how can we see them flourish? I love that thought about your church. So that's about activation, getting them in touch with the reason that they were put on earth for, and serving the mission.
It comes back to the serving as well. That actually they're more likely to still be around from the statistics. That if you do, using that language, activate them. But I guess, like the key is, I'm not just going to activate you in, you can serve the teas and coffees, but I'm actually going to find out about you. And again, it goes back to that cultural thing of, it's not just a system or a process trying to get people to this point, but actually, no, I'm going to value you as a person and really see the gifts and flourish for people. Are there some practical ways that you guys do that? Maybe at Soul Church or Hillsong do that?
Look, we've attempted loads and loads of different systems. At one stage, we did the gift exchange, which was, an online questionnaire. Tell us about your gifts, your experiences, your talents. And then we've got all of the teams in our church to put them online and try and get them working together. And we had some, but limited success, because again, if you try and make the system the answer, it's never the answer. It's about the people and the conversation. So yes, we call it Soul Track. Some churches call it Growth Track, where they come in week 1, they meet John and Chantel. Week 2, hear about our values. Week 3, it's how we can activate them. But again, the system will always break down, but if you get the right people, the right connectors, and create the culture where there's the right conversations, with a system, you've got a much, much better chance. I see volunteering a bit like joining the M1. There's lots of on-ramps. So whether they get onto the M1 through Soul Track, or whether it's through meeting John and Chantel, or whether it's a friend said, hey, I'm serving on streets this week, come and join me. Doesn't matter how they get on the on-ramp. Let's just get them activated and on there however we can.
You used a word there called connectors. And I've heard this used in some settings that I've been in, especially around Hillsong, that people like, I'm going to connect you with someone. Is that a key?
I think it is. I think the people that you have in areas like the foyer are really important. You want the people, all right, not just the person that was available. All right, you actually want the right people with the right gift set. I kind of see the church as the auditorium is where you connect with God, the foyer is where you connect with people. And they're both really important. So creating environments in the foyer where there's coffee and great atmosphere, where people can hang and you can actually have those conversations. Hey, let me introduce you to so-and-so. Where that's happening organically, it's much healthier than someone signs up on a card, goes into a computer, it's referred to a team member who may or may not be functional at that time, who then makes a call, and they may or may not be in when the call is made. It's a 7-step process. Whereas if it's a convo, let me introduce you to this Northern Irish guy who says the word error. It's really weird. You will love him. He does podcasts. All right. So it's about finding the gift and then connecting them with the right person.
No, so
I had a little sledge at you there, Dave.
Yeah, you
Was that
did.
right?
You did.
You didn't come back at me.
Well, we're not over yet. We're not over yet. We always put something in at the back end. That's what we're thinking of. Hey, it's been great for you to share some of the very helpful insights. I really do like that, because I think a lot of times churches have got focused on the system, and it's good just to bring it back to, it is to do with the culture and the heart of the people and the heart of the leaders, because if they don't care about people, and that's an awful thing to say, but sometimes leaders are so busy they're not even thinking about new people coming in through the doors. So I think bringing it back to the heart and back to the culture is the key thing. And it doesn't matter what size of church you are. So there could be a church watching today, there could be a small church, you know, and they may think, like as Nathan said, we've no teams, you know, we've no people to put in place, but it's to do with the heart, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if we treat people, and one of the terms you used there was people are a gift. And if we see those people as a gift and treat them as a gift, then actually that's the thing that'll make the difference.
Yeah, it's good, Dave.
Yeah. Well, it's been great to do this episode and look at new people, and just want to encourage you, maybe you've got to think around that celebration, assimilation, activation.
Yeah, remember them.
I remember.
Well done, 3 there.
Maybe you've got to do that, but we want to thank you, Steve, for being part of this podcast and the previous one as well. And I know for sure that we'll get you back on. And just want to say a big thank you to everyone who has listened to the Church Explained podcast. Wherever you're consuming this content, then please share, like, subscribe, send it on to somebody who would really benefit from hearing what we've talked about today. Plus, I also want to point you towards our icon.church/open, Icon Open, where there are free resources for you as a church. It's been great to be together today, and we can't wait to join together for our next episode of the Church Explained podcast. We'll see you soon.